the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Good afternoon, or good morning, good evening, depending on where you guys might be, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. This is Doge and Aydin Show number 6. I am Brian Martinez, and I'm here with the poorly displayed, there she is, Aydin Paladin. Hi, Aydin, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good. So, we're going to be looking at the work of a Mr. Eric Anderson. Now, there's a few things I want to talk about before we get started. One, why am I talking about this? And two, who is Eric Anderson? So, I'm talking about this because I met Eric Anderson at the ICMI, the International Conference on Men's Issues, just a couple weeks ago in the UK. He had a talk about how essentially he is approaching masculinity studies from a non-feminist perspective. And that actually intrigued me. Like, I saw the guest list and what they were going to talk about months before, and I was asked who would be, some guests that I'd like to talk to. When I saw Eric Anderson's name on the list, I said, and I saw what he was talking about, I became instantly interested for a few reasons. I mean, the main one being that that the academics, or academia in general, is inundated with feminist and other sort of social justice leftist talking points. Specifically, I think it sort of, in my mind anyway, feminism is sort of like the hub of the wheel. I know that people often say it's Marxism, but I think it might be backwards. I'm not sure. That's just my thoughts, because I think that feminism is it's such a powerful force that it can, in fact, lead to everything else. I don't know, though. Maybe I'm putting the cart before the horse. The point is, Aydin, would you agree that academia is pretty leftist, like it's pretty dominated in the same way that mainstream media is?
Oh, unquestionably.
Yeah.
And particularly when we look at the fields as which Eric Anderson works in as a sociologist, and I'm in a field that is adjacent, very, very closely adjacent, which is communication studies. And there is a lot of, I wouldn't call it necessarily infiltration. It is in some instances in full-on infiltration, but sometimes it's just, when you come from a system, you replicate the system. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that, what was I going to say? Because of that, when you hear that somebody is going to be teaching, especially in the humanities, and they're saying, we're going to talk about masculinities, but from a non-feminist perspective, it got my interest. So I said, I gotta talk to him. I gotta, see what he's about. And then I watched his presentation, and I gotta tell you, okay, I gotta give him credit for coming out, because that is being a college professor and coming to the International Conference on Men's Issues to talk to MRAs about whatever, it doesn't matter what you're going to talk about, is bad for your job. And yet he did it. So I got to give him credit for that right off the bat, because that's very risky. Secondly, he's doing this from a non-feminist perspective, and he criticized his mentors openly in his talk, okay? His mentors specifically are Michael Mesner and Michael Kimmel. And they're both prominent figures in the masculinities, and I put that in quotes because it's not really masculinities. They're more like, it's feminism for men. Like, it's just it's just feminism repackaged so that men can consume it. That's what masculinities studies in universities is right now, period, okay? Nobody's doing this outside of that lens, okay? It says we're getting the streams an hour late. Oh, shit. I may have made a mistake. I apologize for that, guys. But we are live now. So tell everybody. Tell everybody. All right. Well, anyway. So I looked at the work that he was doing, and it raised some questions. And so I thought we could look at the work he's done and sort of talk about the studies that he has and what his conclusions are, and maybe if there's any questions about them, because I have lots of questions and I asked him some of them, but he didn't really give me let's say a really good answer, or a satisfactory one, supposedly, or in my opinion. So let's see. His thesis was, you know what? I got some video clips, Aydin. Do you mind?
Great. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So let's play a little bit of the introduction. I want you guys to know a little bit about him, and I'm going to let him talk. So here we go.
In wanting to make sense of that experience.
By the way, his experience is that he came out of the closet as the first openly gay sports coach in the United States. And he said it resulted in a lot of homophobic violence against him. And he had a hard time of it. So it was after that he decided to take an interest in studying masculinities. And I think that's very important and relevant info. Because the thing that got him involved was a personal experience that I guess he found really uncomfortable, at the least, right? If not downright scary. Right. So that's the thing that drove him, and I'm pausing to let you know so you have a better idea of the context.
Right. See, I didn't know that about him, but it is important because as we go forward and look at some of the studies, I think sometimes his, as someone who's read a hell of a lot of studies, very rarely do you actually get author's voice outside of what you do in more critical cultural work and you do in some qualitative work. But I very much get a voice of his authorship. And actually, I didn't know that he was gay. I would imagine that is why his interest is there. But it does add, even for me, some background. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was one of the first things he told us when he started the talk. So, all right. So let us continue. So now we know a little bit about him. He came out as gay in the, I think it was the early 90s. And he was also I think it was baseball coach, but it might be a different sport. I forget.
I sought the PhD. And of course, growing up in Southern California, there was no better person to seek tutelage from than Michael Mesner, who was the expert on sport and its relationship to masculinities. Michael Mesner was correct. Michael Mesner was right about what he had to say about masculinities. The problem that I began to realize with Mesner is he was right for a particular domain of time. He was right about the relationship between sport and masculinities for the early to mid-1980s, but that the culture had changed and his data and his perceptions of men had not.
All right, so just so you guys get an idea, Michael Mesner is a male feminist. He is touted as a masculinities professor, but he is a male feminist, and he believes in all of these feminist ideas: patriarchy theory, male oppression, women worsting, the idea that masculinity means, to the desire or need to dominate people, toxic masculinity, basically. But toxic masculinity is, it's almost always, it's just masculinity in general, or at least it's masculinity if it's not being used in service of women, it is considered toxic. So these are the beliefs that Michael Mesner had. He is in the Red Pill. You can see that's almost a clip directly from the movie. Did you see the Red Pill, Aydin?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Oh, yeah, okay. So let me see here. No, Brian, you are wrong. Okay, Joey Jojo, tell me how I'm wrong. So anyway, so this is Michael Mesner, and that guy he was the mentor of Eric Anderson here. All right, let me continue.
After doing my PhD, I did a postdoc with Michael Kimmel, who is less interested in sport and more interested in gender politics more fully. And Michael Kimmel also taught me a little bit of the showmanship that I have as a presenter.
So he was also taught by Michael Kimmel. And Michael Kimmel is the guy who is also in the Red Pill. He's a very prominent male feminist. He is a lot more political, and he does a lot of like TEDx talks and stuff, along with Jackson Katz, who doesn't come up here, thank God, because that's too much male feminism for me. And by the way, just as an aside, I don't know if you know this, Aiden, but Michael Kimmel was recently accused of sexual harassment. Surprise, surprise.
Hashtag me too.
So now he has to deal with that. And by the way, how many MRAs have been accused of sexual harassment? I'll give you one guess as to how many MRAs have been accused of sexual harassment.
Well, hilariously and ironically, because the answer is, as far as I know, 0. But they would that the opposition would come back at that by saying, yeah, it's because MRAs can't get women, and then a sentence later would say, MRA culture and pickup culture is terrible and toxic. Yeah. The absolute lack of consistency. But I would bet you money that would be the response to that kind of question about why all these male feminists keep getting outed as being abusers and harassers of women.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what they do. That's exactly what Hollywood did when Me Too started. Mm-hmm. Was Hollywood did this thing where they had the Me Too thing started in Hollywood, right? Rose McGowan and I think right. Who else was it that started? It was a couple of female actresses, right? And then like Terry Crews and shit. And it made Hollywood look bad because they had been virtue signaling against Donald Trump for years.
Yeah. Well, a year, grabbing by the pussy.
At least a year since they grabbed him by the pussy.
Stormy Daniels, yeah.
Right, but I mean, they had been virtue signaling on how bad he treats women, and how he's grabbing him by the vagina and whatnot. And then the Me Too thing comes, and it makes them look like total hypocrites and asshats. So what do? So they eat it for a while, and they do their own virtue signaling from within Hollywood. But then they start broadening the narrative, and they say, oh, Me Too isn't just us. We're not the only ones doing that. It's everywhere. It's wherever there are men, there is Me Too. So they got people, women specifically, to hashtag Me Too every experience they had that ever made them uncomfortable involving a man at any time. And it basically blew a smokescreen out so that people wouldn't be looking at Hollywood anymore. And I think that was on purpose. And male feminists do that too. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, it was absolutely on purpose to draw the attention because they didn't. Well, I'm not going to get. This is outside of the point of our talk today, so I'm not going to get too into it. Mm-hmm. Oh, but it was absolutely the point to distract away from the fact that people like Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton were close friends with Harvey Weinstein. In addition to, 99% of Hollywood were buddy with him, mm-hmm. and all of them basically knew he had this long-term history of molesting or assaulting women, essentially. And it was the same thing with Bill Cosby. Everybody knew about it, and nobody said anything. But particularly with Weinstein, when that crap was uncovered, that was to distract from the political aspect, at least in my opinion, mm-hmm. to distract away from the fact that, like, oh no, look over here at Trump again, bad, nasty right-wingers or anybody not at Hollywood. Please don't pay attention to the man behind the mirror, right? Or the man behind the curtain.
Absolutely. And male feminists do the same thing. They virtue signal about respecting women's, and whenever they get caught, they use it as an excuse to say, well, look, I'm flawed, and I made this mistake, and imagine that. I'm one of the best men. Can you imagine what those other men are doing? Because I'm one of the good ones, and I still made a mistake. It's exactly that. They're just going to use it to say, these men are much worse. I'm waiting for that to happen. Like when Justin Trudeau was accused of sexual misconduct, and he said, well, we'll have to listen to her story, and I got to validate her story, but maybe we just remember different experiences. And Michael Kimmel was doing the same thing. He said, well, we'll listen to what she has to say, and I apologize if she felt uncomfortable, but we'll have to, maybe we just had different experiences. Like, all of a sudden, they're okay with due process and shit. And Listen and Believe is that's really inconvenient. So, yeah, it's only a matter of time when enough male feminists are going to start trying that whole, it's bad that I did that, but that means that non-feminist men are only that much worse. And
it's them getting a taste of their own medicine in that sense. Real quick, sorry.
Yeah,
that, and I hate, because I don't agree with it. I do believe in due process. But I'll say I don't agree with it, but I won't stop them from eating themselves. I think the thing here, though, is that the reason why there's been a backlash, too, in the mainstream outside of trying to draw attention from Hollyweird is because, yeah, male feminists now have to go, well, hang on. It's almost like if you've had any kind of sexual interaction with another human being, that now puts you at risk.
Yeah.
with a woman, excuse me. Well, or someone who identifies as a woman at this point.
Yeah,
so.
that's true. But mostly just women. But yeah. So, all right. Well, anyway, I just wanted to touch on that about Michael Kimmel and Michael Mesner. So I'm going to jump ahead to where he starts talking about his actual studies, and then we'll look at them.
Decreasing cultural homophobia. All national surveys show that the project of the millennial youth has been the massive, rapid decrement of antipathy towards homosexuality. And in a culture in which one is afraid to be thought gay, but unable to prove their heterosexuality, which is all heterosexual males, homophobia serves as a policing weapon of gender. You want your friends to think you're straight. You can't prove you're straight, so you act in hyper-macho ways to socially prove you're straight, and that lasts for a little bit of time. The purpose of homophobia and anti-feminine attitudes was to say, I'm not gay. But as homophobia has dropped, as it's no longer homosexuality that's stigmatized, but homophobia which is stigmatized, youth began to take a different perspective on gender. They began to celebrate all of the things that feminists have wanted men to be, and masculinity scholars had said men were not. They started to be more emotional with each other, more honest about their emotions. They started to be more egalitarian in the relationships. They started to have gay friends. They started to develop bromances, very intimate relationships between other men. They even began a great deal of physical tactility between each other. In my research on the United Kingdom on team sport athletes, over 90% have cuddled with another male.
I'm just pausing it for a second. So,
that study is going to be, the citation on that one is...
Openly
that's
gay...
the orthodox...
orthodox and inclusive masculinity,
Yep.
competing masculinities among heterosexual men in a feminized
Oh, wait,
terrain.
no. That one is the one about the cheerleaders. If he's talking specifically about the... Actually, this one should be it, then. This should be the contesting a hegemonic masculinity in a homophobic environment, maybe? That's the openly gay athletes.
Oh, yeah, openly gay
this one
athletes,
should be, Well, we've got all three of the studies. We cite all three.
I have the links to all of them up. It might... I don't have access to... well, actually, no, the PDFs are right here, so you can... sort of look at it. But I would need access. It's okay. I have the abstract, and you've looked at them, so
I've got them all up on my computer. So
okay, all right. Well, why don't you just talk about them, because I have the links already shared. But what are your thoughts on what he said just now versus what you looked at and that kind of thing?
So it's very interesting, actually, hear him say it and hear his explanation actually is illuminating and gives me a bit more perspective on it. In the first, let's go through them via date. The first one that was published is the Openly Gay Athletes Contesting Hegemonic Masculinity in a Homophobic Environment. This was published in 2002. Basically, what he was looking at is he interviewed 26, if I'm remembering the number correctly, 26 different openly gay athletes who either served as athletes in high school or college environments, and asked them about their experiences. Now, keep in mind, again, this study was published in 2002, meaning the data were probably collected between the years of 1999 and 2001, depending. I'm not sure. I know he began it looks like he began collecting some of his data actually from a book that was published in 1998. So, he did. He also included, of the 26, 8 of the 26 that are used for interview research in this qualitative piece are from 1998, meaning that the data from all of this, sorry, I'm trying to make this very clear.
It's all right.
Goes back potentially to like 1996, 1995. And when I say what was the general opinion towards gay people in the United States in 1995, particularly in an athletic environment, I'm just, asking you from a lay person perspective or outside of what we do all the time. So trying to think the average person's perspective,
Okay, yeah. Ask me the question
as best as we can.
Ask me
as best as we can.
Yeah, ask me the question again.
What if I said, what do you think it was like to be a gay teen in 1995 in any sport? Do you think that was a fun time or a hard one?
I would assume that that's probably a hard one. Yeah.
He didn't actually find it, man.
No.
Yeah.
So
we would imagine that.
We would imagine that. So you're saying he didn't find it? Like that's not what people were saying?
Not to the degree that he anticipated.
Okay.
Let me find the exact quote here if I can while I'm trying to go over. Athletes encountered little physical or verbal hostility. They were, I think he says, to his surprise. Yes, athletes may have. Okay, hang on. All right, here we go. I found that openly gay athletes were generally surprised by how well they were treated. They frequently credited their coaches and teammates as being open-minded and accepting. However, these athletes may have overstated. This is where I start to say, when I said that I can... Sometimes when you read people's research, you go... This is the discussion section, by the way, so he's allowed to interject with his opinion a little bit more here. That, however... is I think you maybe expecting to see something and you didn't see it and it violated your expectations, but you still want to see it.
Yeah.
So, however, these athletes may have overstated their acceptance because they were treated better than they had expected to be. Well, yeah, that's an expectancy violation. This reverse relative deprivation was largely influenced by the fact that they were not physically assaulted or verbally harassed. The opposite of what most expected before coming out. So, in other words, they expected to be harassed and assaulted, and they weren't. And in fact, really the bulk of this first article is focusing on the use of the term like that, or the phrase "that's so gay," or using gay as a pejorative.
Yeah.
Correct.
I remember it was in the 90s when people were starting to really crack down on that whole... Don't say that's so gay because that's homophobic, even though you're not actually talking about the context of homosexuality, but rather just something that you just don't, that you just think is lame, basically. But anyway, that's an aside. So that actually raises another question for me, though. Another question. Why were these kids so surprised at how well they were being treated compared to why was their expectation so negative? Like, where did they get that impression? And I know that wasn't part of his study, but it does make me think about that. That there were people that essentially when they were asked, he does discuss that. Okay.
Yeah, he mentions the fear of violence is justified. I once coached a heterosexual track athlete who was physically beaten by a member of the school's football team who assumed him to be gay. A 250-pound football player sat on him and beat him, fracturing 4 facial bones and trying to gouge his eyes out with his fingers as he yelled, "I'm going to kill you, you fucking cross-country faggot," simply because his coach was gay. So I believe that that's from Anderson's personal experience. Now, I don't know about his actual personal experience coming out as gay, but I'm guessing that's referencing himself.
Okay,
so,
but
his coach is being gay.
I believe that is something that he did talk about, and I think it was that traumatic experience that could put him on the path that he now finds himself. But what I was asking wasn't necessarily whether or not Anderson was surprised that these kids were treated better, but that the kids were surprised that they were treated better, because I think that's what you read in the interview. As part of his study, was that the people he interviewed were surprised at how well they were treated. And I guess what I'm thinking is, why were the interviewees expecting something worse? Were they they were conditioned to believe that because they were gay they should hide and that they should be scared? Like, that's what I'm trying to, I guess that's what I'm getting at. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, well, I mean, this is actually the data from this had potentially predated then of the what happened to what's his name, Laramie. Oh, shoot. Oh, what's the name
Laramie?
of the kid they killed in Laramie, Wyoming?
Oh, let me look it up while you're.
Yeah, but you know what I mean, where they tied the kid up to a fence and beat him near to death and left him to die. Matthew Shepard, that's it.
Okay.
I mean, that was just in the public gestalt at the time. It was this idea that if you were outed as gay, some hick is going to come by and kill you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that was in any way statistically accurate, because of course it was not. And I think that might have been the reason for which, and I think it's also the reason why I mentioned like that experience that I had read earlier in this article, and why it's probably confusing for Anderson, or why he's questioning a lot of this, is because there's been either personal experiences or media influenced experiences that give us the impression that the violence towards gay people was potentially greater than it actually was in as late a time as the 90s, when at that point things had, become to really change in the general feeling towards homosexuality. I'm not saying gay people weren't beaten and killed. Obviously they were. That's, what I'm describing two events here, at least one from Anderson's account and one that unquestionably happened to Matthew Shepard.
Sure.
Although so obviously that did occur.
Some people in the chat, or one person in the chat, was saying that it was actually more so drug related. That's what someone is saying.
Drugs and AIDS also.
AIDS, yeah. So it may not specifically have been because he's homosexual. And I'm not trying to take. Nobody here is trying to take anything away from that. We know that. The homosexuality. While generally I think our attitudes towards it are probably more accepting and faster than almost any other, I guess you could say minority status, as it were. But it's still good to try to look at it from more angles than the sort of oppression Olympics angle. So I think
Anderson actually recognizes that, which is why. It's funny, we spoke very briefly beforehand, and I said one thing, and it's good that you gave him kind of an introduction, is that from my reading of his research, he doesn't seem to be malicious. Often when I read feminist critical cultural research, I go, yeah, okay, I see you have a point you want to make, and you don't care whether or not you have any data for it. He seems to be like struggling, legitimately trying to understand what's going on. And I think as a scientist, that's kind of the best way you can be, is just trying to understand something more thoroughly.
Yeah, for sure. And so, okay, so we looked at the study, and you said that there was a little bit, in terms of this openly gay athlete stuff, there was a little bit of, spin, or I wouldn't say spin, but he put a little bit of narrative into what he was talking about. It's like he was sort of wanting things to be... he was sort of altering, I guess, his conclusions a bit based on his, a bit of his bias was creeping in, right? Because he was basically saying, oh, well, they probably thought that their experience was better than they expected because, and he sort of injected his own thing in there. Is that right?
Well, it's his guess. His guess in the conclusion is, well, maybe the fact that in data that may date back to as old as like 1995, 1996, gay athletes who were openly gay in high school didn't have as negative of experiences as he predicted, and even they predicted, because they were, just because their expectations were increased. This is called expectancy violation theory, actually.
Yeah.
And there's thousands of pieces of research on it, which is that first impressions mean everything. Okay, so at your first impression, you expect things before the encounter happens, and your expectations can be positively or negatively violated. A positive violation means things go better than you anticipated, and it does tend to increase your opinion towards something because you were expecting it to be worse. If you're expecting to get beaten and murdered and killed, and you don't, then in comparison, the not getting beaten and murdered and killed looks great in contrast. Yeah. And he's not wrong in that assessment in terms of that being a viable rationale for this. I don't think he's absolutely wrong in that. However, there are other things that, when it comes to the aspects of masculinity, I think are a little silly. I also think, again, he was looking for something, he was surprised he didn't find it, and then tried to find an explanation, which, again, as a scientist, you should want to do, is try to understand what you did find.
Yeah, that's definitely, and I think, it's something that I think all scientists can fall into. It's a trap they can fall into. One other thing I wanted to ask about. So he mentions in the clip that I was talking about, where I just stopped it, he says, he talks about how more men are engaging in bromances, which are, really intimate male heterosexual relationships with other males. Okay. So I know that this is a word, bromance, which is sort of new. Like I have only heard it in the last 5 years or so, maybe a little bit more. But I never thought, and this is just me, so maybe I need to be educated. Maybe I need to be educated on this, okay? I never thought that bromance was anything more than just being friends with a dude and feeling like you can just talk to him about anything, which is something that I've had ever since before I could remember being alive. As far back as my memory goes, I've had close friends. So would I call them bromances? Yeah, sure, if I wanted to make a joke about or make light of my friendships, but I don't think that they're any different than friendships. I just think it's a synonym. So when he says bromances, it sounds like he's trying to attribute something more intimate. So my question is there anything in his studies that talk about this that you've seen?
I'm not going to cite him quite yet. I will go back to that. But quickly, as an aside, one thing that I've seen from the data, and I actually have a study somewhere around here. I'll see if I can find it, because it's from like 1969. Oh, God, it might even be older than that. Oh, it's really old. I found this study that was like, it might have even been from the 50s. And it was assessing how much time men spent either with their, what they consider to be friendships, and how much time they spent with their wives and their families and male friends and all this stuff. It's a really old study, which actually makes it fascinating to look at, 50, 60 years in the future. And at the time, they found men spent most of their time with their families. But the other time they spent with male friends. They don't spend it with women friends, just like women spent the vast majority of their time with their women friends. In fact, like to a much higher degree than men.
Do we call that, would you call that a homance? Is that a homance?
I guess so. I just find it ridiculous. When you were playing that clip, it hit a nerve, in my head. We went, oof, and had like a sharp response to him, sort of suggesting that the idea of male closeness is somehow new, when I think that's actually very ancient.
Yeah.
Male bonding is, in terms of, because it strengthens the tribe from a very tribalistic, very, evolutionary psychology stance.
Absolutely, and that's why I thought it was strange that he was using that term as though it was new, because I'm like, well, yeah, we all have friends. Like it was strange to me. And also, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else, because there was another different thing I wanted to bring up regarding what stuff that he was just saying.
I think that just what he considers bromance is not what not what most people consider a bromance. He includes, and if we look at the research that he's conducted in his literature, he includes more physical touch, and I don't mean like, hey, good job, slap you on the ass, like that kind of thing. He means like the cuddling stuff, and I don't know how much of that is legitimate, but he doesn't include. I feel as if he's breaking apart, and he does this, but he calls it, the exact terms are consequential recuperation of heterosexuality, or heterosexual recuperation, ironic recuperation of heterosexuality, and there's all these different things to break it into. But I think he wants to split these into either acceptance or recuperation.
Yeah, and that brings it, like the cuddling thing was the thing I was going to bring up next. So he says 90% of heterosexual males have attested to cuddling with another male. Now that sounds like a really high number, but here's the thing that I would ask. I want to see the data. I want to see the data too, but what does cuddling mean in this instance? Because if it's just dudes hugging, or if it's like, you know, a soccer team scores a goal and everyone does a group hug and they all start like, you know, lifting each other up and shit and like patting each other on the back and slapping each other on the ass, the stuff that men have always done, you know, the sort of the sort of tactile way in which men show affection for each other.
I mean, women do this too in ways that I that would never be considered gay, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know, Brian, did you either go out camping or go to have sleepovers with male friends as a kid?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So did I. Did you maybe like sleep in the same bed with your friends? As kids, you know, you're 11 or 12. I did.
Even like when I got, even when I was sort of like early teenager, it was like head to feet. That was the rule, you know?
Exactly. Everyone's done this.
We would unknowingly 69 in the bed. But we were just sleeping. Sure to bed. Yeah.
I think that in a camp situation, 69 is just farting in each other's faces.
Yeah,
so.
basically. Yeah.
But no, but I mean, like everybody does. Well, humans are a tactile species in many ways as well. We get a comforting sensation. We get the production of, you know, the pleasure hormone, oxytocin, through skin to skin contact.
Mm-hmm.
That only takes a couple of seconds. You know, to start just. Well, outside of warmth, it feels nice to touch other people. So all kids do this. This is totally normal. It doesn't necessarily mean anything about your sexuality. And I think that's where he's struggling.
Yeah, that's the weird part, because I would not have thought any of that was sexual. And so... If none of it is sexual to me, none of it talks about sexuality, none of it is specifically masculine or feminine, because if the studies that you're talking about go as far back as the 50s, and I'm sure that men have been doing this. No, I'm sure it's true. I'm sure that men have been bonding since, you know, we were fucking like prehistoric or whatever, you know, in some way, and women bond in their own way, you know. But
there's nothing wrong with that. I think that you know, no problem with Dr. Anderson. Again, I think actually from reading his stuff, I and now knowing him a little bit more and actually hearing him, it's like I empathize very much with him. Yeah. Yes, but I think he's trying to find explanations that in holes they might not exist in. And for example, so he mentions, okay, the overt homophobia. So we can define what overt homophobia is. That's tying Michael Shepard up, regardless, whatever. Okay, we can use that as an example of homophobia. Let's just, for the sake of argument, or any event, a Tuesday in you know, Saudi Arabia, whatever. In Saudi Arabia,
when
they throw them off the rooftops.
Yeah, sure.
That's overt homophobia. So. Yeah. We know at this point, as does Dr. Anderson, that doesn't happen very often outside of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Right? He expressed that in his 2002 article. Might be like, oh, whoops. All these students were actually kind of saying they were supported and accepted by their teams. They weren't ostracized. They weren't beaten. Some of them were, yes, and that's a terrible, you know, shame and tragedy. But most of them were not. So why don't we maybe redefine homophobia to not be physical violence and or verbal violence even, and let's redefine it as what Anderson calls in his 2014 or 2012 piece, 2010 piece, which is "It's not acceptable anymore: the erosion of homophobia and the softening of masculinity." At an English sixth form. Actually, this might have been the one we were talking about in the beginning, because this is British only. But what I found really interesting about this is that, he basically had to redefine the terms. He had to redefine it into, what are the exact words that are used here? Hang on. Oh, no. Okay. By changing it from, we're not concerned by overt homophobia. We are concerned with heterosexual recuperation. So heterosexual recuperation, as defined here, is a heuristic tool for understanding the strategies boys use to establish and maintain their heterosexual identities without invoking homophobia. In other words, we're now defining it as potentially negative or harmful or deleterious to gay people for heterosexual males to just not be gay.
Yeah, that's troublesome, because he was already equating, and this is the reason why I want to do the show with you, was when I talked to him and I saw his presentation, the one thing I could not shake, and I wanted to get into this a little bit later after we looked at the other stuff, was essentially he was equating identifying as more masculine with homophobia. So he correlated those things. That's the title. Because I asked him, I said, okay, so there was a study. Well, we can get into it. I'll get into it later. But he was correlating the more masculine a man behaves, the more masculine he identifies. If you ask him, how masculine do you think you are? And they say, oh yeah, I'm really masculine. Then that is sort of like, it is also simultaneously homophobic. The more masculine you are, the more homophobic you are. He
calls this orthodox masculinity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the idea is that now here's something I find very interesting about anybody who is sort of a linguistic scholar or a sociologist or a sex scholar, such as this guy is, Dr. Anderson, is that you are now defining what masculinity is in a way, as you say masculinity means non-athletic or more feminine, when in the second study that I have here, the one that falls in between them from 2005, is a complete analysis of male cheerleaders. And although they from his analysis, I believe, I don't remember how many cheerleaders were in this exactly, male cheerleaders, some straight and some gay. All of them, for the most part, they did say they would have preferred to be on the football team, but they were still highly masculine. And it was a draw to the cheerleading sport, if you want to call it. I think cheerleading should be defined as a sport because people get very, very badly injured.
Yeah, it definitely involves athletic skill, so why not?
Right.
And I think they have competitions too, right? So.
Oh, thousands of competitions.
Yeah,
actually,
sure.
Actually, if you like Penn and Teller, there's a really good episode on it about cheerleading. So, in other words, they have all these guys who are even competing in what he calls the orthodox masculinity sort of performances within cheerleading. But the reason for that is often rational. The biggest, strongest guy can throw the girls the highest. So even though cheerleading has this more feminine perception, and even though in this study as well, he talks about how it's totally accepted about how, quote, gay male cheerleading is, there's still these masculine elements. Now, I think he finds those problematic, but I would say, why not? This still allows men and women to perform gender roles and is a sport that is completely accepting of gay men. In fact, women probably, by his own definition here in this research, feel more comfortable with gay men tossing them and holding them and grabbing them, you know?
Yeah.
Because they're not sexually worried about there being a sexual element to it.
Okay. Well, let's go on to the next clip. I want to hear the next part because
sure.
This is where it gets spicier.
You might find this preposterous. You may not. But this is what the millennial youth are about. Love of each other, and that includes a great deal of physical tactility. A lot of people didn't believe me when my research showed that in the United Kingdom, 89% of heterosexual male undergraduates had kissed another male on the lips.
I'd have to see the study on that. That sounds like a high number. Again, I'd be asking myself in what context and
right. And you understand
what was the line of questions and go ahead.
And you understand all the studies we're looking at here today are interview-based studies. They're qualitative research, so there's no data. It's just, this is what I observed. We should take the researcher's word for it. I generally do. And I think from having read 3 of his that he seems to be legitimate in just trying to understand what's going on. But there's no data here. So whatever he cited, I don't have that.
Yeah, it's, again, it depends on the sample size. Because when you told me how many, I think it was, how many male...
100 to 200
okay.
people. It's all for... You get... Okay. You have diminishing results of statistical analysis different types of statistical analysis have diminishing results at different levels. Okay. But at a basic correlation level, you never need more than 100 participants. Not really. Taken from a random sample? Nah.
Okay. All right.
200 at best.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for the number of gay athletes, it was something like 20. It was a very low number, right?
26.
Yeah, 26. Is that too low for that type of study, or?
He's engaging in qualitative and critical cultural research, which is very different from what I'm talking about, which is empirical. Now, his research is still technically empirical, but what I'm talking about is quantitative.
Yeah,
So
sure.
the difference, qualitative is I'm going to get an interview and talk about what was said in it and analyze that. And then the more critical cultural is, here's my opinion. Quantitative research is how many people said yes this many times to this question.
Yeah.
That's all that is.
Yeah, quantity
we don't
versus
have
quality,
that.
basically. Yeah, okay. Because, qualitative is basically in-depth interviews with individuals, so the numbers tend to be smaller because it takes a lot more time to get all the info, and quantitative is basically just getting the numbers from as many people as possible.
Homer Simpson's makeup shotgun, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you're blasting it all over as much as you want. And you know what? Both types of research are valuable. But this is interesting to hear from 26 gay athletes, probably from the late 90s. That's interesting.
Okay, I got a couple super chats, and then I'm going to move on. So I forgot to get to them. But guys, if you guys have any more questions, statements, comments, whatever, please put them in super chats, and I'll read them on the chat. Hokey Bukisa gives us $4.99 and says, the a-holes that beat up gay people would be the same people punching Nazis, overzealous norms enforcement. Thank you, Hokey. Joey Jojo gives us $5 and says, male friendships always have a weird gay undertone to me. Thank you, Joey Jojo, for the $5. Maybe there's more about your own sexuality that you might need to explore. Tyler Preston gives us $2 and says, men bond physically while women bond emotionally. Yes, that's true. Although men bond emotionally by being physical, i.e. playing sports with each other and engaging in hobbies and stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just think that both sexes do. The thing is, we're complementary. We're not contrasting the sexes. Women and men bond physically and emotionally. Women, let me do your nails. What if that's a very physical thing? Let me brush your hair. Women do that kind of thing. You know, men are like, let's go out and toss the pigskin around. That's or let's, watch, even two guys sitting together in a bar, not saying anything, is psychological bonding in its own way. Just like two girls sitting and crying and watching. I know this is so stereotypical, but it's not stereotypical based on reality, right?
And crying while watching the
Notebook.
The climax. I was gonna say the climax of My Cousin Vinny, or whatever it is that they happen to be watching.
Right, but they're just different ways of interacting. Yeah. But psychological and physical are completely normal as far as I can attest to and see from all of the data and just observations for men and women.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It is a bit of both. But and then I got another one. Mr. Roboto gives us $5 and says, George W. Bush was a male cheerleader, not gay. Male cheerleading is a gender-neutral activity, not a sport. Well, I mean, I think it could be a sport. They do competitions. I don't see the harm in calling it that. So, but yes, he was, and I don't think it's gay at all. Actually, it's probably a really good way to pick up chicks, to be honest.
That is exactly the point that Anderson actually makes in his article.
Literally, as well as... figuratively.
So
yeah.
Took me a second. Fuck.
Okay, let us continue.
A culture in which there has never been a history of this occurring. But it has been replicated. It's been shown to be 10% across the United States, with 40% of males kissing on the cheeks, and 30% in Australia. This is the project of masculinity for millennial youth. It is completely and totally different than my father's masculinity or my masculinity. It is a new, softer, inclusive form of masculinity. And that trend is not going away.
All right, so He's saying,
describe, yeah.
yeah. So I gotta get into the. This is the part that got my attention. In the presentation, he was very insistent on telling us that this trend is not going to change, and there's nothing we can do about it, and it's a softer and more inclusive masculinity, which is, I think, well, maybe relating back to his study called Orthodox and Inclusive Masculinity. By the way, Orthodox masculinity sounds a lot like homogenous, like what is it? Homogenous masculinity, or you know, like the patriarchy in a way, like in terms of, or even like maybe it's a flip side version of restrictive masculinity, which has been the recent rebranding of toxic masculinity. They're calling it restrictive masculinity. So there's a lot of rebranding going on. But Orthodox masculinity sounds like essentially the idea, and maybe I'm wrong, you can tell me, is that masculinity operates within a system of expected behaviors. And if you don't operate within that system, i.e. that orthodoxy, then you are not considered to be masculine. So men try to act as masculine as possible so that they can still be considered part of the orthodoxy. And to do that, at least according to what Eric Anderson here is saying, it means that they almost have to act in opposition to homosexuality, if not outright femininity, which I think in a way gets conflated, femininity and homosexuality in men. So.
Oh, I agree completely, because homosexuality and femininity are totally different things. That is ridiculous to say that just because you like to have sex with other, well, not you like to, because you prefer as partners, people that you are attracted to are the same sex as you are, that somehow makes you the opposite sex. No, that's a different thing. There's a different thing going on in there. And when we look at the fMRI data and all this stuff, like a gay man's brain does not look like a straight woman's brain. Now, a transgender person's brain, parts of the fMRI data, parts of the brain light up that are very, very similar in a trans man's brain as a straight, biologically female woman. That's not what we see in gay people at all. So that's first of all ridiculous and not really based on the science that we do have. Secondly, I find this odd because essentially he's talking about is that we've become so accepting of homosexuality that the fact that any straight men would want to define themselves as straight is still potentially harmful in some way. Because, well, of course they want to define themselves as straight. I don't see the issue here. And again, I think he calls it inclusive masculinity, but he defines it in opposition to the, is it not recursive? What's the word he uses? Not recursive. The reactionary homophobia. Reactionary homophobia, I believe, is the right term. Oh, consequent or recuperation. Heterosexual recuperation. I'm sorry, that's the phrase. Okay. That we have to, that straight men now have to feel as though they have to recuperate their heterosexuality. Yes. But I would argue, Dr. Anderson, do they not have to prove at this point that they're straight, that they're interested in women when we become so accepting of gayness as being normal?
Yeah, exactly. And I find it strange. Again, these are the I want to get into the tough questions I asked him because I'm going to ask them again here. And for any of you guys who heard me ask this stuff before or talk about this because maybe you were at ICMI, I apologize for my redundancy, but I think other people who are watching need to hear this, and they should also hear where I'm coming from, because this is the stuff that is really, really raising my hackles. And again, much respect to Eric Anderson, because I know that he took a massive career risk by even coming out to be with us, and I know that is dangerous, and I hope that it doesn't lose him his job, because I think honestly he is figuring this stuff out as he goes. Because remember, he was coming, speaking of orthodoxy, he was coming from an orthodox environment that had a presupposition about what masculinity is and how it is defined and how it exists, which is in opposition to femininity, which is how it is talked about in the let's say the humanities in general. So he's sort of working his way at least, so I got to give him credit for that, and that's why he showed up at the ICMI. But I think he has a ways to go, because he's sort of like, in my personal opinion, I think that one of the reasons why he got involved with academia was because of his experience as a coach. And you know, I'm sorry that happened. I think it's terrible, but I don't think it's a good, let's say, it can get in the way of you trying to find the truth if you let the personal get, you know, sort of dictate your path. Like, I've been lucky that despite my involvement with HBR and the men's movement, I actually don't have any gripes in my personal life like that relate to any men's issues. I don't have kids, so I didn't lose them. I never went through a divorce. I didn't get, like, you know, accused of sexual assault. I've never had to deal with false accusations. I've never been involved with any domestic violence issues. I'm not even circumcised. Like, I have no complaints. I have my father in my life for, you know, most of it. He's just sick right now, but I had him in my life for most of that time. So this involvement that I have in the movement does not come from a place of, you know, I have been personally affected and therefore it's made me an activist. It's not that at all. I just want to know what the truth is, and this is sort of where it's led me, and this is just, you know, where I currently sit. And I think that helps because it keeps people's personal experiences from affecting their work. And I know that that's just not the way it's going to work out for most people. I think I'm lucky in that way. But Eric Anderson gets nothing but my respect for, again, coming out here and doing this stuff. And while I do disagree with a lot of his conclusions and a lot of his presuppositions, I hope that he keeps on working, because I think that if he's interested in the truth, then it's only going to be a matter of time before he finds where most of us line up.
I agree 100%. Again, I having read through his research, I think he seems like a diligent researcher, although not in my field. Does not look like in the long run. It is very easy for me to pop some data into SPSS or whatever statistical program and come out with a result by saying, like, oh, hey, I'll run a log linear regression or something, you know, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's easy. Having to go through hundreds and thousands of lines of interviews, that's a different level. I'm not saying like one is easier than the other. They're just different things. We don't do the same. One thing I do want to bring up, though, in addition, because I was thinking about it, is his definition, though, of ironic recuperation of heterosexuality. So he says that there's two ways that men basically define their heterosexuality in the current zeitgeist, wherein it is no longer not okay to be gay, right? The mainstream is, which is astounding, because generally not a lot of professors even at this point would say that the mainstream does accept homosexuality, because we do. Yeah. But they deny that and say the whole world is horribly homophobic. He described something called ironic recuperation of heterosexuality, which is the satirical proclamation of same-sex desire or gay identity to maintain a heterosexual identity. And my argument, do you know what I mean? Like when guys are palling around
and they're like, they act like they're gay to each other, like they make a comment. Yeah, sure. No, I've been there. Actually, Eric Anderson did that to me when I interviewed him. But anyway,
well, because everybody's done that.
Yeah, he kind of flirted with me a little bit. It wasn't too weird, but I dealt with it. But
that's funny if you did that. But because the thing is, I would say that's actually very normal male interaction of being like, haha, wouldn't it be funny if we were gay? Like, you know, fuck you, faggot. Whatever. That's just another form of, he finds it problematic, but I would go back to the original study and say, well, the gay guys didn't have a problem with it. They didn't have a problem with it in your cheerleading study. They didn't have a problem with it in your sports study. In every study that I've read from him, when I actually read the responses of his participants, all of them are like, yeah, it's cool. I mean, there are bad instances, but for the majority of it, it's not horrible for these people. Again, this appears to be looking for problems where they don't necessarily exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and plus, if you let people engage in that kind of palling around, you know, behavior, it normalizes homosexuality, not homophobia. It makes it like people are more comfortable with it, right? Because you're not like policing the way people should be acting around it, and I think that actually makes things less tense. And I think that gay and bisexual men would be more than fine with it. As an aside, I want to mention that in the MRM, I don't know if you know this, and I don't know if you guys know this, but every time I go to an ICMI, so we don't have like the data, but based on our patrons that support us and based on the people I meet at the ICMI, there is a highly disproportionate number of gay, trans, and bisexual men at these things. Now, I don't mean they're still probably within the minority, but I'm talking like they're like close to like at least a quarter, if not half, of all of the people involved.
Right, statistically is, yeah.
Yeah, that's like way disproportionate, right? And I think a lot of it is, and this is the thing about them though, we do have a high number of gay, trans, and bisexual men. But the thing that's interesting is, especially in particular with the gay and bi men, because obviously the trans men are, I mean the trans women, they're called trans women, are clearly presenting as women. But the gay and bi men, they're actually pretty masculine. Like you don't know they're gay until they tell you. Like they're not running around with feather boas and like makeup. They're not like Freddie Mercury gay. They're just like, they look like regular guys, and then it kind of comes up in conversation that they might be gay or bisexual. In fact, one of the guys that I met at this conference that I'm going to be interviewing on Monday is a bisexual porn star that Vice did an article on.
Yeah.
And it was like this terrible hit piece. And I'm going to talk to him about the hit piece that they wrote. And he had a genuine interest in this. So it's interesting because this kind of stuff that Eric Anderson talked about in this presentation worked from presumptions about what masculinity is, what heterosexuality is, and what homosexuality is. And it left a lot of the guys in the audience, the bisexual men in particular, but also the gay men, really confused. Because they were just like, that doesn't make sense to me because I'm gay, but I'm not like, I'm not like a flaming homo gay. I'm like a regular guy. Like there's one guy I met there. He looks like, he looks straight up like the crocodile hunter. And he looks like the crocodile hunter, and he's gay. And I didn't even know. I was like, what? Oh, okay. Wow, that's surprising,
He calls that the inclusive masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that, I think that term is silly. What you're just saying is that you're saying men can be things other than hyper-aggressive all the time. And I think to anyone, maybe not who doesn't have that kind of background or something like that, might say, yeah, duh, men aren't always hyper aggressive and hyper competitive. They are sometimes, but that's not all that comprises masculinity. And he does this a little bit in the article about the cheerleaders, talking about how the perception of a cheerleader is a woman. So you have all these guys who are cheerleaders, but then a lot of them are straight because they want to get with women, and then a lot of them are gay, and then the women feel more comfortable with them. But they still have, I think he defines it in his own way, the masculinity, the things of like, I can throw her higher. That makes me a real man, as somehow negative. And I don't think that's true. I think that even among gay men, it's like, yeah, I'm a guy, I can throw her higher than the woman could. And that's because you, on average, could do that. And then seeing who can do the best. That's, women are competitive too, men are competitive. I don't see how this is somehow, this inclusive masculinity that he speaks about is somehow detrimental. And real quick, I do want to point out, because somebody said this in the chat and I read the data on it. Oh shoot. Where'd it go? Oh, Tyler Preston asked why they don't do these studies on women. He actually mentions in one of his studies that he specifically chose to only focus on gay men because, and I'm pretty much quoting here, although I will find it quickly if need be, that all women who engage in sports are, or most women who engage in sports are presumed to be lesbians.
What?
Yeah.
What? That's crazy.
Yeah, hang on.
What?
Hang on, I'll find it.
Okay. No, I go ahead. I'm gonna read the super chats while you look that up. That's crazy. He didn't have a lot of data on women, and I did ask him about that. So,
I got it already. You ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Women athleticism in itself is a contradiction to femininity. So female athletes are frequently assumed to be lesbians. Because of these differences, I have chosen to examine gay male athletes only.
Wow, that sounds pretty misogynistic and homophobic in the same breath. I'm shocked. I am shocked, Eric Anderson. It's true, gay men and lesbians don't tend to get along. Okay, well, anyway, let me go ahead and read through the super chat. So FrenchNator2 gives us $2 and says, hand job, no homo, not gay. Thank you, FrenchNator2. Joey Jojo gives us $5 and says, honestly, I hate my own masculinity and sexuality. I am trying to learn to love it, but I really do hate being a straight cis male. Tyler Preston gives us $5 and says, Aydin, as a woman, I need to ask your opinion. What is the appeal to shows like Supergirl and Revolutionary Girl Utena that so many girls like a lot? I guess I'll let you answer that if you know.
I really like Utena. I don't. What Supergirl?
Isn't Utena a little bit gay? Isn't that kind of Yuri, like borderline? I never watched it, but I know it's got
borderline. It's full out. It is full out Yuri. I mean, well,
okay.
It's full out Shoujo Ai.
Yeah.
There is absolutely girl love in that. Like,
yeah,
I mean, that's
girls do like that stuff more. I think Sailor Moon has a lot of that too, and that was actually really popular.
Here's a really funny thing. In the American version of Sailor Moon, Uhara and Michiro?
Uranus
and
Michiro. Neptune or something?
Yeah. Uranus and Neptune are lesbians in the Japanese version and the manga, and in the American version, they are cousins. And there's a scene near the end of the season that's Sailor Moon-esque. Now, see, look, I know this much about Sailor Moon because I fucking like it. It's because I'm a woman, probably, but
yeah, it's because you're a woman. It's okay. Sailor Moon is made for you.
But exactly, but there's a scene where they just like touch hands and grasp fingers and interlock their fingertips back and forth. Kinda which, like by scissors. The way, I found weird in these studies where he describes like his participants locking fingertips. I'm like, ooh. Ugh, I feel dirty reading this study.
Like
dirty science. But anyway, they kept that scene in, but they're still cousins in the English version.
Well, that's because in the United States, being incest is better than homosexuality or lesbianism. Apparently, incest is wincest. That's basically what television networks are telling you. So,
well, I am from West Virginia, so.
All right, so Mr. Roboto gives us $2 and says, a way to prove you're not gay is to prove it anyways. Yeah, just suck a dick. Mr. Roboto gives, that'll show him. Mr. Roboto gives us another $2 and says, what are you trying to say, Doge? Everybody gay? No, there's just a disproportionate number of gay and bisexual men in the MRM, and considering we're homophobic or whatever, anti-gay, it's just really interesting. It says a lot about what our opponents think homosexuality is, and by extension, what masculinity is. Peter Nietre gives us $5 and says, RE gay men in the MRM. I think more and more gay men feel that the LGBT movement has been taken over by feminists and SJWs. Absolutely true. On top of that, gay men are now considered the top of the privilege stack, so you guys are no longer getting protection from feminism or feminists unless they feel like invoking your type to use as a shield. But you know what? It's probably better that more and more gay men walk away from feminism because they have no interest in you guys. Come on. So let me go on and play another clip here. We're going to hear a little bit more of this. This is a bit longer, but I think it's important.
So I want you to look at some YouGov data here with me. Over here is when we ask men, do you identify as completely masculine or completely feminine? In 2016, masculine.
I'm pausing it here. This is the big one. This is the reason why I did the show, okay? So this is his main study. Now, this is called Masculinity Changes with Age, YouGov study from 2016. So this isn't actually his, so it may not be here now that I think about it. And I apologize,
I don't have that
Aydin.
one. Nope.
Yeah, I apologize, Aydin, for this, but I think we can still sort of challenge it because I know that it's like 3:14. Like 15 more minutes, and I think we should wrap it up. But this is the big one, all right? So he did YouGov did a series of studies where they asked men, and I don't know what the sample sizes are, but we can assume that they're large. It's fine. I'm not going to worry about that.
It's N is 151 people.
151 people. Okay, yeah, the formula's right here. So 151 people, men, whether they feel
No, men is 65. I'm guessing. If they use
no,
men
no,
and women both in the study.
Really? No, I think I asked him because I asked him about the study, and according to what he said,
we generally do test men and women and ask them about masculinity versus femininity. So it says M65 plus N. Actually, so the total sample, whatever this sample is here is 151 people. That's all I can say based on the chart I'm looking at. I don't know what the M equals then.
Yeah, I think because here's what I think is what we're looking at. The 65 plus is in this particular study, this was men aged 65 and older, because I remember he said that specifically. So that might be what the M65 plus means. Because he said we asked men, so basically we asked men from this generation. So going back to, because this was done in 2016, the men were 65 years or older. So we're looking at the greatest generation up until like the generation right after that. Is that the boomers? I think. So we asked them, and they were all, from what he said, they were all men. And what was because the question was on a scale from completely masculine to completely feminine, how do you identify? How do you feel? How masculine do you think you are? Right? So if you are completely masculine or significantly more masculine than feminine, slightly more masculine than feminine, even down the middle, slightly more feminine than masculine, significantly more feminine than masculine, and completely feminine on the other end. So the age 65 years and up group, if you look at the chart, they mostly identified as completely masculine, like overwhelmingly so. And then, and then it goes down from there to like the completely feminine either being zero. I guess it's zero. It's very close to none, right? So that's the older generations. And what he's trying to get us at, and I'll play more of the clips you can see, is that as the generations go along, on from the 65 years and older crowd to the next generation to the next one, they identify less and less with complete masculinity, and they start to swing more towards the center. So I'll play more of the clips you can see. And these
completely feminine.
Sorry about that.
In 2016, men who are 65 and older almost exclusively said they were completely masculine or close to it. But watch what happens with the next cohort of men. Men who are 50 to 64 have a statistically remarkable difference.
So here's the next age group of the next generation, okay? I think it's the boomers, I'm not sure. And they identify more with femininity and less with masculinity. Do you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And their willingness to affiliate with complete masculinity. Men who are 25 to 49, again, we're losing the complete masculine. And
so 25 to 49, even a little lower. There's a little bit of a spike here, right?
we're rising over here in the middle. Watch what happens with millennial youth, who, by the way, I see probably maybe one or two of in this room. Obviously, that's because of the cost. But perhaps you could talk to them at break if you don't believe me. Boom.
Oh, okay.
There is a rejection.
What?
The M is the median.
Yeah, okay.
The mean. I'm sorry, mean. That's what the M is. I don't normally see it reported that way, so.
Yeah. So this, and so the millennials. And by the way, I asked him in the interview, do you have any information on Generation Z? And he said no, and he also doesn't know exactly where Generation Z starts. So, and I'd be really curious about that, because I think that.
Wait, I'm sorry, it's their age. M is 66 plus, M 80. Okay. This is the age. Sorry, I'm still trying to understand what this was. All right, so interesting things to point out too is that he did have largely different sample sizes, but we see,
Oh yeah, you're right.
Total change.
Yes.
Total change though in from highly masculine to the
slightly more masculine. It's like slightly more masculine than feminine. That's what that's what number 3 is.
Look at the millennial generation Z, which actually has the smallest population size, to the point where that's starting to approach. Now I need to, his R values I'm sure are greater than or are less than 0.05, but
No, wait. I don't think that's Generation Z. He says those are millennials.
18 to 24.
Is that
So
that's millennials or
at that point, those are like the last of the millennials.
Yeah.
18 to 24. Based on 2016 data, yeah, 18 to 24, those are the very tail end of the millennials. Look at how depressing their complete masculinity score is there at 0%.
Yeah. Almost. Now, Anderson.
What is masculinity and
Exactly. So Anderson, it's some important things I gotta put out there. I want to leave this up for now. When I asked Anderson, how are you measuring? Like, what does it mean that men are identifying as less masculine? And what does that, like, how is that a good thing? And that was when I concluded, and I did this by asking him directly, that he equated sort of acting in homophobic ways. Being homophobic, the more is correlated with being masculine. So the more masculine you are, the more homophobic you are. And the more feminine you are, the less homophobic you are.
Yes.
And so, go ahead.
No, he absolutely, if you read through the articles that are linked here, I think you guys can find that is a consistent sort of narrative throughout his work, is that masculinity is somehow also homophobic by its very nature, in that it is aggressive, it's violent, and it's engaged in these defining the self as not homosexual. That is what masculinity is, which I think he really does know better. So
yeah, and I asked him this too, because here's the thing: he's saying that this change is incontrovertible. That's his word, incontrovertible. It's like imagine my shock, or I would argue if you're Kevin Logan or something. So incontrovertible, that means that it cannot be questioned. Of course, we're looking at the data. I mean, I guess if you're just looking at the numbers, sure, they are what they are. But they do, for me, they raise more questions than answers. I asked him this, and I don't know if there's any way to know this. If these men are identifying as less masculine by their own description, so basically they're asked without being told what the definition of masculinity is, they're just being asked on a scale of 1 to 7, how masculine do you think you are? And as the generations go on, men identify as less and less masculine. So there could be could we get a number of explanations for this? Now, Anderson's explanation is that these men are just becoming less homophobic. That's his explanation at the end of the day. The people in the the World War II vets and the Vietnam vets, they were just really homophobic. And so as we move on down the line, Generation Y, or the millennials, are the least homophobic. Now, if we're just looking at how good it is that we're less homophobic, thumbs up, that's great. But that doesn't necessarily explain this, because I asked him this. I said, no. Could there be a chemical reason for this? Because we also have less testosterone than we have had in previous generations. But bigger than that, could it be that men are identifying as less masculine because they've been told how evil masculinity is for the last 30 years, right? So if you're being told that masculinity is bad for a long time, and then you do it through the media, and you do it in academia, and you do it on the news, and you do it in your movies, and you do it in music, and you do it everywhere, and then you ask those men, how masculine do you think you are? And they say, well, I'm not gay, but I'm a little bit more masculine than feminine. Well, how can you possibly know that you're getting any legit data? Right?
Okay, so exactly. So we're told that masculinity equals aggression, violence, bad, mean, horrible. Not the good things that we might associate with the term masculinity, which already, I don't know how he defined this. I don't have this study, so I am throwing shit against the wall. Yeah. Hands up here, I don't know what I'm talking about in terms of I do not know the data from this study. However, there's a couple ways we can measure this. One is the BEM sex role inventory instrument that's generally used. If they didn't give that, and the question was how masculine do you feel, then absolutely, that's even worse than the BEM sexual inventory instrument. In that could be all over the place. That's absolutely saying, well, I know masculinity is associated with badness and violence and aggression and rape.
Yeah.
So of course I don't want to be a masculine man because I don't want to be a rapist. So yeah, geez, we really I would have to see the data specifically, but regardless of which one you use, it's obvious why we've seen this change. This is not a change in a differentiation between how we approach homophobia or how many people are homophobic. This is not a change in anything other than, as you see at the bottom here, it says masculinity to femininity Likert scale. Okay, what that means is it's a self-report instrument. I can already tell you that just based on what's on the screen right here. Okay.
Yeah, it is.
That
He told me
means
that.
Self-report.
Yes.
So, I don't know
means
if
it's
it was the femsexuals or what,
Yeah,
but
that
it probably
means
means it was
it's-
self-report.
Yes, it was. He told me that, and it means it's completely subjective upon the interviewee to actually define in their own mind what it means to be masculine. And if you could be easily conditioned to have a certain opinion of masculinity, especially if you're a millennial. I mean, it's probably impacted you more than anything because when did gender studies start? It wasn't in the 65 and older crowd, right? It was like probably people in the 50 to 64, and look at how much of a drastic shift that is from the other one. And by the way, I sent you a link to the study, and they did study women as well and ask them the same questions, but this only covers the male half because the women half, it sort of mirrors it in the opposite direction. So women have felt less feminine over time as well. And so
that's awesome. I mean, that's like, it's actually a terrible thing, but it's cool to read.
It tells you a lot, though. It tells you a lot. And I asked him this, and I said, because this is another thing I asked him. So he didn't really have an answer about whether or not it, men identifying as less masculine was impacted by sort of our general cultural attitude towards masculinity. He doesn't think it does,
Oh, Jesus,
but I think it absolutely
included in the
does.
data.
Yeah.
It's included in the data you just sent me. Is masculinity becoming a dirty word? Do you have a positive or negative impression of the term masculinity? In men 65 and plus, only 11% viewed it as negative, compared to 42% in men ages 18 to 24.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, women's has actually wow. Did you see this?
Yeah,
This
I
actual
glanced at it.
output.
Yeah.
It's a very stark graph. It's basically the youngest 18 to 24 demographic. We're both for men and women. But do you want to know the astounding thing? The negative perception of the term masculinity is stronger in men than it is in women. Women still think masculinity is okay comparatively.
Yes, I asked him. So that was what I was getting at, Aydin. This is the most interesting thing. I asked him, I said, so with this study, because he was expecting that the people in the audience would get really upset at the ICMI. And more than anything, they were confused because, again, like I said before, there were a lot of bisexual men who are masculine. And so, and homosexual men who are masculine, who are basically saying, wait, I'm masculine and I'm gay. So are you saying I'm anti myself? Because that doesn't make any sense, right? Because they are. I mean, they were masculine, athletic, gay men and bisexual men. It doesn't make any sense. And so I asked him, did you get a lot of pushback from these studies, these results that you've been showing people, these YouGov studies? And he says, oh yeah, I got a lot of guys that were really unhappy with the results, and they didn't like that the maleness was changing, and it was this sort of like, well, but there's nothing they can do about it. And then I said, what about women? Do women have a problem with these studies? And he said, you know what? Now that you mention it, I actually got a lot more pushback from women than men on this, because women do not like that this is happening. They like masculine men. And so when they see that men are becoming less masculine, it actually displeases women that the shift is happening more than men. And to what you were saying, the men in the studies find masculinity more distasteful than women.
Right, it's like it's not actually a surprising result. The fact that they would publish it is kind of what's surprising to me, and because why is not everybody seeing this? Because this is that's a horrifying result. To say that, yeah, it's the same, and now it has gone up in women negative masculinity, but women. I mean, we all know this. This is okay. Somebody said in the chat, I don't remember who it was, but it's like, why are you surprised by the results? I like seeing confirmation of things that we say, in data, because when we say things, we're postulating. I like to see numbers. Numbers make me happy. So, well, this actually number does not make me happy, but that's astounding that there's that. That yeah, we now have, this is definitive proof right here, and this is from what, 2014? 2016, okay.
So 2016.
That 42% of men versus 39 view masculinity as a bad word. And a bad thing. Oof. In terms of what Dr. Anderson's saying, though, I think, yeah. He's looking for something that that just doesn't exist, and he's trying to. I think that he, through his maybe a lens of personal experiences, is looking for things that aren't necessarily there, or looking for explanations that don't adequately explain what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Not his fault necessarily. Everyone's biased.
I
this
think,
is
yeah,
something we accept.
He's just being affected by it a bit, because when I asked him those questions, he actually told me that it gave him something to think about. I also asked him about the feminine scale, because he was correlating homophobia with masculinity. I said, well, when women were, asked the same questions, and their graph comes out the same, just in the opposite direction, does that mean that women were anti-lesbian in the beginning and they become less anti-lesbian over time? Or does it not apply to women? Is femininity, in essence, anti-lesbian? Because I was homophobic against women, I guess, but I don't think so. Because in general, I don't think we've given too much of a shit about lesbians. But I would just wonder if that's the same. Because I don't think it's the case. I wonder though, because have we demonized femininity to the same degree that we've demonized masculinity? I would say no, but maybe. Maybe, in its own way, we've kind of, feminism has kind of acted as though masculinity is the ideal for women to achieve. Like, they want women to do more masculine things. So maybe that's the way in which that has sort of manifested.
And feminism is also anti-natalism, and that's a whole big part of it. Or much of feminism is anti-natalism, which is don't reproduce, you go out and work, children aren't going to make you happy. So the thing is that have traditionally defined femininity as being, I don't know, the thing that women do naturally, like our purpose to exist as a fucking life form, to reproduce, as is every life form's purpose, but particularly for women. It's an absurdity that they're so anti having children, and I think that's part of it. And maybe that's all it, because I really don't know about how that all intersects. It becomes such a rubber band ball of issues, and
this gets really confusing when you think about all of when you include women in this graph and you look at their numbers, it raises even more questions. But let me play the last minute. Now I know this is a longer, I included a link to this, Aydin, so if you want to watch it, this is his entire talk.
Sure.
But I only wanted to like look at the beginning where he talks about this graph. So let me play the last minute of this, and then we'll make our final comments.
Of the completely masculine in total. We are seeing the same thing with heterosexuality. We are seeing a growing percentage of young straight men identifying as mostly straight and not exclusively straight.
So he's saying the same graph applies to male sexuality. Either that, or he's conflating the masculineness with straightness. So he's saying that there are more millennials that are identifying as mostly straight as opposed to completely straight. Now, I don't I don't know why that would be so important. And this sort of comes back to what is his purpose in making this the topic he wants to discuss. And I keep going back to his personal experience. And I really think that it may have shaped his entire life path. But that's completely speculative on my part, and I don't really know. But you were going to say something about this, his additional correlation?
Oh, just his data here. It's interesting because if his whole thing is that as it goes up, our acceptance, so does homosexuality go up, that actually conflicts and contradicts his entire thesis, more or less, in the "It's Not Just Acceptable Anymore: Erosion of Homophobia and Softening of Masculinity" article from 2010.
Mm-hmm.
In that he's saying like, oh well yeah, boys are more accepting of homophobia or accepting of gay people, but they have less homophobia, but they react in these different ways that assert their masculinity. I don't know if this is intentional or if I'm misunderstanding. It's possible I am, but it seems here as if he's conflicting with his own research.
Yeah.
That, just saying.
I think that's definitely something that I would challenge is, and besides, like, do men just identify as more gay now? I thought that was something you were just born as. Like, you got to help me out here. Is this something we condition into people, or is this something that they, that they just are born with? I don't know. So let's see. I got some super chats, and then I'll continue the rest of this. Scooter gives us $1.99 and says, "I wish my gay male privilege would kick in already." Oh, it will. You know what? The thing about privilege, Scooter, is that you can't see it. So you're just gonna have to deal with it. But you know that you have privilege. You just don't get to see it or benefit from it. But you do benefit. It's just in ways that you don't know. Tyler Preston gives us $5 and says, "Aydin, are you planning on doing a retrospective video on Revolutionary Girl or Sailor Moon?"
No, I mean, maybe at some point it might be interesting.
That could be fun, actually. You should have fun with that, especially Sailor Moon, because it's so mainstream. And then Scooter gives us another $1.99 and says, "So women who are homophobic are masculine?" No, women can't be homophobic, Scooter. They can't. Unless they reject lesbian advances, in which case they are. So anyway, let us play the rest of the clip.
Millennials are opposed to identity category. They're opposed to hypermasculinity. They're opposed to pigeonholing sexualities. This is all changing.
Men who identify as entirely masculine are not necessarily hypermasculine. I don't know what hypermasculine means, but I have to put that out there. That's not the same. So.
Now, at least you think, well, maybe these are just YouGov folks, right? And maybe they're a particular type of person that subscribes to these surveys. Here's some data that is collected just a few months ago on British rugby players and football players. And it almost shows the same thing. Slightly more masculine, perhaps because they play incredibly violent sports, but still, this acceptance, the mode, is far from completely masculine. So that is the future of masculinity, and that is not going to change.
All right. So that's basically after that, he goes into other things that I don't really care about too much. But this is what his entire thesis was, and this is the reason why I challenged him on it. After that, just as an aside, guys, he goes into this bit about how the MRM needs to rebrand itself to be more inclusive, and essentially, if it can rebrand itself, then feminism or feminists might work with us. And it's okay. It's something that we've heard. We've heard it a million times before. Sargon of Akkad told us this a while back. He said, "You guys should stop calling yourself the MRM and call yourself something else because it'll help." And the fact is, it doesn't matter what we do. Feminism is not concerned with gender. Feminism is concerned with itself. And gender are just tools that it uses to perpetuate itself. So rebrand, no amount of rebranding is going to help. And feminists don't want to work with us. I mean, they just don't in general.
Nope.
So what is better is that I know what Eric Anderson's trying to do. He's basically he left where he was because the area has become too hostile to people who think outside the box like he does, even though I would argue it's not that much outside the box based on what we've talked about, but this is worth considering, guys. This guy's talking points were too male-centric, male-sympathetic for the feminists in his universities. They thought that what he is doing is essentially witchcraft and that he can't do it in their schools, and they don't like it, all right? This guy is the least radical, and these are the ideas that he has. Or at least I think he is, right?
Mm-hmm.
This tells you Michael Mesner, Michael Kimmel, the kind of like rhetoric that they use, and you've seen it and you know what they talk about. It's far worse than this guy's. And he's still working from some pretty bad assumptions about masculinity, about maleness in general, about masculinity as it exists in contrast to homosexuality and well, he doesn't actually bring up women at all in his entire talk, which I guess is nice for once. But you know, this is the kind of this is the distance, I guess, from the norm that his rhetoric has come. And I do accept him. I do hope that he keeps looking, and I actually have nothing but respect for him coming this far. So just putting that out there for you guys to think about.
Exactly. I agree completely.
Yeah. French Native 2 gives us $2 and says, "We are Menonism now." Yes, we be Menonism. That's going to be our new thing. We're going to change. We're going to rebrand. No, rebranding never works. It never worked for us. We may as well just, you know the label. Did you know this, Aydin? The label MRA was not actually something that MRAs applied to themselves. It was something that feminists.
I believe, yeah.
Feminists applied that to. No, it's okay. Feminists applied MRAs to us, and we just, okay, that's what we are then. Like, we didn't care because at the end of the day, MRA is just like a phrase that's used to describe what we do. It doesn't actually define an ideology. It's just, I don't care what you call me. I don't, like the same thing. I said that about Eric Anderson. He's like, well, I'm not an MRA, and I was like, I don't care. Just keep working on what you're working on. So
I mean, I guess it's a little different. Like a men's rights advocate or men's rights activist, neither one of those really, just from the words involved, have a negative connotation. When you say social justice warrior, it has like that. It does have a negative connotation that I do not think actually inherently by the language is implied by MRA, which the fact that feminists applied that is silly and funny to me, at least.
Yeah. No, they are the ones that applied it. I think they were trying to, because I think that the idea of people who care about men's issues is so laughable that they could just call it what it is, and people would just find it funny by virtue of that. So, but anyway, are there any other things about his studies or the stuff that we talked about that you wanted to bring up or say?
Not. I think I covered most of the major points that I wanted to hit. I think it's just interesting, and I would recommend, again, guys, I won't speak for the honey badgers, but if you go to sci/sci-hub.tw and type in the DOI numbers of any of these studies, you may be able to get access to them. Just saying.
Okay.
But I highly recommend reading them. I do not think he is somebody with a just for like the fifth time, I don't think that he has, bad intent or malintent. I think he's actually a pretty cool guy, from what I can tell, who is struggling to maybe struggling academically to deal with two different things: the things that he's been taught and the things that he sees empirically.
Yeah. So I got one more question based on everything that we've done here, and I was asking this question while I was at the ICMI of like everybody that I could, because I thought it was funny and it was a good way of making my point about what I think the problem with Eric Anderson's study is. And I'm going to ask you guys in the audience to answer this in the comments section, and I'm asking you, Aydin, first, okay? Although it's unfair because this question is actually really easy for you, Aydin. This will be a really easy one. On a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being completely feminine and 10 being completely homophobic, where do you stand?
Well, that's a difficult instrument to answer because these are not diametrically opposed things.
Yes, they are. We just saw a study on it. Obviously,
Through-
they are. So
through that strange definition. Well, I guess I'm more feminine.
yeah.
than
So
homophobic.
would you say you're a 1? So I asked Cassie J when I was at the ICMI. I was asking all these people.
I'll say a
3.
Well, wait. What's the number? What's the number? Is 1 more feminine and
yeah, 1 is
10 homophobic?
One is all the way feminine, like you're just a girl, and 10 is all the way homophobe, like you're ready to string up faggots and set them on fire. So you're either 1
like
to
a 3, I guess.
So a 3? Wow, that's pretty homophobic though, isn't it? That's a little homophobic. I'm just saying.
It's a little bit.
So it's funny when I asked people at the ICMI this question, and all the men were struggling. Like they tried to give me the number 5, like to middle of the road, and I was like, "Wow, man, that's quite homophobic, dude." But then when I asked Cassie J, she says, "Well, I'm a woman, so I'm gonna say 1. I'm feminine," and I was like, "Damn, you're there's nothing wrong with you." So anyways, and she can because she is feminine. So there you go, guys. What do you think? Scale of 1 to 10. 1 being feminine, 10 being homophobe. Where do you stand? And just give us the answer and why in the comments, and we'll find out just how homophobic our listeners are. So in the meantime, I just want to say we're gonna go into the after show. We're just gonna hang out and chit chat a little bit. Are you ready to do that, Aydin, or do you need to go?
Sure thing. No.
All right,
well,
cool.
I need to grab a drink because my
Yeah.
voice is drying
We'll
out.
take like 5 minutes to get drinks and stuff. So we're gonna go into the after show. If you want to be a part of the after show, you have to do that by being a patron at www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. And I want to thank you, Aydin, so much for coming on and having this discussion with me. I really enjoyed this, and I want to thank you guys for joining and watching us talk about this. Please talk about this in the comments section. I look forward to seeing your responses and your thoughts. Please, if you can, be good to Eric Anderson. I think that he's really just figuring this stuff out, and he needs our support because he can't go back. The feminists are not going to take him back. I think that he's like a lost dog at this point. So let's try to welcome him in with open arms and be open to discussion. I will be having him on the show for an actual interview soon as well, so be on the lookout for that. All right, guys, be sure to hit like and subscribe if you're not subscribed to Badger live streams, because that's where all the live shows are going to be. We'll talk to you guys later. Thank you very much, and have a great